Hi, everyone. Welcome to One-on-One with Sax Wealth Advisors. I'm joined today with Marie DeCaprio to talk about the value of estate planning. Marie, to kick us off, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you, Matt. I'm very excited to be here. I'm Marie DeCaprio. I'm a partner and wealth advisor here at Sax Wealth Advisors. And I really, one of the things that I do with clients is financial planning. And today I want to talk about the value of an estate plan.
To kick things off, what is an estate plan? You always hear people talk about it, but what is it?
Yeah, I think that's a good question because sometimes it can be daunting when people hear that. They're like, oh my gosh, an estate plan. So an estate plan, really, the legal part of it are certain documents that make up the estate plan. So it's the will, it can be a trust, it's power of attorney, healthcare proxy, living will. But really, more importantly, what an estate plan is it tells your beneficiaries, your loved ones, how you want your assets distributed upon your death. And so that really gives it clear, your intentions are made very clear through these documents. And also it helps us clients clarify how we want those assets distributed and where we want them to go. So a lot of times we think like, should they go to the kids? Should money go to the kids, grandchildren? But without really thinking more in depth, like what does that really mean? What does that entail in terms of, okay, what if my kids get married, they have grandchildren, if they don't have grandchildren, what if I don't have kids? So it's all of those kinds of things to think about. What would happen to my assets if I wasn't here anymore? And so a lot of times too, people want to think about their legacy. What kind of impact do they want to have? What kind of, how do they want people to remember them sort of after the time that they're not here? But it's really a time to be methodical and really thinking about your own life and what's important to you.
Okay, so that's the plan part of it. Now, what makes up the estate that you have to plan for?
Yeah, so that's a really good question because, for most people, it's your financial accounts. That's what we're thinking about, right? So it could be retirement accounts, your bank accounts, but it could be things also like your home, if you have a vacation home. It could be things, people have special collections or things, artwork, jewelry, all that, those sorts of things, which maybe don't sit in an account. It might be in your house. It might be in a safe somewhere. But if you know, like, I want so-and-so to get this, my grandmother's engagement ring, or, I want my best friend to get, special earrings that I have, you have to lay that all out because otherwise no one would really know where that's supposed to go. And so what you may have wanted to do with it is not going to be possible because no one will know. The other thing that I think is really important, which people, it's hard to think about, but if you have children and they're young children, they're not independent, they're younger than 21, what happens to your kids if something should happen to you before they're ready to be off on their own? And I think that is really important because you're basically naming who's going to be the guardian for your children. So it's more than just money in a lot of cases, especially if you have a young family. What happens to those kids? And people, quite often, even if you don't have kids or you do have kids, people have pets. Pets are really your family members. So what happens to them? Who's going to take care of them? Are there assets set aside for the care of those pets? It's a concern. And again, something you want to think about and try to plan for in the worst case scenario. That's really what we're trying to do, right? Hopefully we never have to deal with these things, especially early on in life, but at least if something does happen, things proceed as you would have wanted them to.
Right. So many different scenarios, but who is estate planning generally for?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Generally we think like estate planning is for the older person, right? But as I just stated, a couple of minutes ago, estate planning is really for everybody at every age, right? Especially if you have young children, whether you're older, younger. But it's because it's going to dictate what you have amassed in your lifetime, what is going to happen to that after you are no longer here. Part of the estate plan too is like a healthcare proxy. So what is the healthcare proxy? It's basically a document that where you assign the ability for somebody else to make healthcare decisions on your behalf. And that's an important thing, right? Because you want to know that the person who's making those decisions when you are not able to is going to make them in a way that you would have wanted to. So it's somebody who's going to know you. It's somebody who maybe is not going to be overwhelmed with emotions if they're in that situation, who can really think clearly. I know people have sometimes chosen, you know, if they have a friend who's a nurse or a doctor because they feel like they're more comfortable in that scenario. But that's an important thing too. And another example is like the living will. So the living will kind of lays out, if I am in a situation where it's end of life, what is it that I want? What is it that I would want people to do? Do I want, you know, the people around me to go to any lengths to keep me alive, or would I prefer these other solutions or other avenues? So it really encompasses more than just, you know, I want to give everybody I know $5,000. It's really about all of those things. Or if you have a house, or if a family has like a vacation home that everybody has loved, you know, you need to make arrangements for that. If you want to make sure that that house, for example, stays in the family, stays with the generations, how is that going to work when you're not here? You know, you have to make sure that that is kind of laid out so that people don't have to worry about it. And most importantly, why do you have an estate plan? It's really for your loved ones. I mean, you're not going to be here, right? So it's for the people who are left behind, who oftentimes can be overwhelmed with, you know, so many emotions, and then to have to start trying to figure out, what do we do with all these accounts? Where do I get money from? How do I pay the bills? Can be absolutely paralyzing. So the more organized we can be, the more we can have things laid out, the easier it is for the people that we are leaving behind to be able to deal with all of this.
Okay, well, speaking of loved ones, what is an estate tax and who's paying the estate tax?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Is it left over for them to pay, or how is that?
That's a good question. So, I mean, a majority of people, I would say, do not necessarily have to worry about estate tax, because estate tax, at least right now, is for people who have in excess of, I think it's a little over $12 million now of value. And if you're a couple, then it's $12 million for each one of you, right? So the federal government, the IRS, imposes a tax on the amount that's over that $12 million threshold, okay? And it's imposed on the estate. So I know a lot of times people will say to me, well, you know, I'm getting an inheritance from an aunt or an uncle or a parent or whoever it is, and they're like, well, what does that mean for me? Do I have to pay tax? No. The tax comes out of the estate first. In that calculation, all the debts are paid, which includes any kind of taxes that are due, any debts that are due, and then what's left is distributed to the beneficiaries. So normally you're going to receive an inheritance. It's going to be free and clear to you. Now, once you take those assets and you invest them, and that creates either dividends, interest, that sort of thing, then there would be a tax going forward. But just receiving an inheritance does not create a tax liability for you. So that's something to be. And again, you know, if you do have an estate that is large enough that could potentially be subject to federal estate tax, as that person, you want to make sure you've done as much planning as possible, because there are strategies that we can use, and we have amazing resources here within Sax Wealth Advisors and Sax LLP to really help you look at those various scenarios to how to either pay for the estate tax and mitigate that estate tax. So again, that's planning is so important to make sure, and also the rules change from, you know, occasionally from year to year, and even those amounts that are excluded from estate tax change. So we're sitting here today and it's $12+ million, but in 2025 that goes down. So the planning is always ongoing. You know, right. You might make a plan today, but it doesn't mean that things won't change in 2 years, 3 years, whatever down the road. You may have to look at it again and say, does this make sense?
Right, right. And something else that's always mentioned with estates is trusts. What is a trust? Is that a way to pay less in taxes, or what can you do with something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question too. So I get that all the time. You know, people will call me or say, you know what, I want to have a trust because I don't want to pay estate tax. well, it's not really how it works, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of trusts. And again, for the larger estates, there are things that, our estate planning team can help you with in terms of planning and trying to come up with that. But really I think what a lot of people use is what's called a revocable trust. So revocable trust it's just like you owning the assets in that trust. And what it really does is it allows any assets to pass through the trust and not go through a will, which would include this probate thing that's called probate. And probate is really having to go through the court system and all of the sort of rules around how to distribute an estate, rather than just using a trust, which the assets would move via what the trust document says. So a revocable trust can be more private, and it's much quicker because you don't have to go down to the court, file the papers, wait for it to be approved, et cetera, et cetera. In some cases, it can take months to do that. So if you want to be sure that your heirs are getting money right away or not having to go through that whole process, legal process, one of the ways to do it is through a revocable trust. Again, talking to your advisor and talking to an estate professional, and a trust and estates professional will help you figure out, is this the right move for you? Does it make sense? But it doesn't, if your estate is going to owe estate tax, is going to owe estate tax. I mean, having a trust does not automatically eliminate those estate taxes.
Okay, so there's no free lunch.
Correct.
And you touched on it just now, but just to be clear, for anyone who doesn't have a will or doesn't have their estate planning documents in order, what happens if you die without a will?
Yeah. So if you die and you don't have a will, you die in a state that's called intestate, which means dying without a will. And then what happens is the intestate laws of the state that you live in take over. And so every state, and they're similar, they might be a little bit different, but every state will dictate, okay, if a person dies and they have assets, there's a way that that money is going to be distributed. So usually it's going to be like to your next of kin, it could be to parents, it could be to siblings, it could be to children, it's some mix of those people. So again, why we want to have a will is, let's say, for example, if I don't have a will and something happens to me tomorrow, my parents are 87 and 86. Like, they don't necessarily need to have my money at this stage of the game, right? It really should go to my kids, my husband. But if I died without a will, it's possible that they could end up with some money if I didn't have a will. So that's why, again, we want to be clear about who is to benefit from the assets that we have when we die, and they don't just go in a way that is dictated by the state laws.
Right. And if you don't have a will, and you do have to go through that process, is there any time frame of how much longer that may take rather than if you do have a will?
Yeah, I mean, it can take a lot longer because, again, we have to figure out, the courts have to figure out who's the next of kin, how to contact them. There's a lot more calculation. So it takes a lot more time when you don't have planning than when you do. So again,
right.
It does make sense to have. And again, you don't need to have, we think of a will as like, it doesn't have to be the magnum opus. I mean, it can be a very straightforward, clean, direct document. But to have something in place is much better than not having something in place.
So agreed that there needs to be something in place, but then how do you go about deciding who gets what and how everything should be distributed?
Yeah, I mean, I really think that's a great question. I think that, that's where having conversations with your advisor, with your, close family members to try to think about what is, the best way to distribute your assets. So, if you have children, do you, distribute those assets equally? I mean, does that seem, maybe there's a situation where you've helped, one child more than others. So should the other ones get more, upon your death? Like, how do we allow for that and accommodate for that? What I would say is, as I tell clients all the time, I mean, it's your money, right? You saved it, you worked for it, you earned it. And you can do whatever you want with it. But I think if you do anything that is not equal or including people that maybe, you know, family members wouldn't approve of, whatever it is that you want to do, I think you want to make sure that your family knows that you have done this. So it shouldn't be a surprise to people when they read your will and say, I didn't, you know, great, the third cousin from, I don't know where, Canada somehow gets money even though no one even knew this person existed. Let people know what it is that you're doing, why you're doing it, because I think the last thing that people want is to, you know, to not be here anymore, to have left money, to have left assets, which then creates problems and friction within the family, right? I mean, do we really want that to be our legacy, that we've left this sort of unrest within the family? So I think it's really important to, again, you can do whatever you want, but whatever the thought process is, then share it with the people around you, so that they're not surprised and that they don't start arguing and fighting and have bad feelings, because it does happen when, you know, someone passes away. I mean, love is money, money is love. It just kind of turns into that. I've seen it, you know, time and time again, and it is sad because we could have planned for that. You know, we could have taken steps so that that didn't happen. And now there's fighting over, you know, and unrest in the family that really didn't need to happen. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. If you do go through the process of putting these documents in place, make sure you share it with people. The worst thing that can happen is that, you know, you keep it to yourself and something happens to you and nobody knows where to find it.
That's exactly right. That can't be, especially things like the durable power of attorney, the healthcare proxy, because those things you actually need during lifetime. You know, I've told, you know, a number of people, we had, you know, my father got sick a couple of years ago and still is, and I needed his power of, you know, healthcare power of attorney. I needed to have that because I was acting as his proxy.
Right.
So it didn't help me that it was in his safe. Luckily, I did have a copy because we planned. But yeah, the people who make sure that the people who are going to be using this have the documents and they can get at it.
Right.
Very important.
And so it sounds like I need an estate plan for my dog. But so you start with all these different parts when you're younger, and as you go on and your life gets more complicated, you add on pieces. So is it a one-time thing and do it and forget about it, or how often should I be updating my estate plan?
Yeah, I think that's a really good plan, because that's a good question, because estate planning is really an ongoing process, right? You want to have the documents in place, but if you do it when you're 30, chances are by the time you're 40, 50, 60, you're going to need to have reviewed that plan, right? Because things will change as life changes. You're going to need to make changes to your estate plan. So I would say, I mean, usually the rule of thumb is two things would precipitate a change to your estate plan. One, something changes in your life, so getting a dog, having a child, getting married, getting divorced, you know, those kinds of things. And then the other thing is if something changes within the tax rules that affect estates that you would be affected by, that would be a good reason to look at your estate plan again and decide, do we need to make changes? But I think even more than that, you know, as we go through life, we tend to not keep an eye on, we sort of, you know, accumulate things. Not only do we accumulate things, we accumulate sometimes accounts, assets, you know, oh, this bank has a great rate, let me go open an account there, or this is a great high yield, you know, money market fund, let me go open an account, yeah, there. Before you know it, you have an account here, an account there, an account. And suddenly your financial footprint has become so large that it makes planning so much harder, because you have all these different financial institutions that would potentially need to be dealt with if something, either you were to become incapacitated or to die. So I would say constantly be reviewing, look at your accounts, look at where you have accounts, where can we consolidate? Do I really need to, is it worth it to have that account that has such a small amount of money in it? Why do I have that? How do we continuously consolidate? Because otherwise, you know, just like the stuff we have in our home, we just have things all over and we don't really know why they're there. And in fact, it can be very challenging if you die and you have accounts at all these different financial institutions, because every one of them has a different process for how to distribute and get those assets. And it just puts even more of a burden on your beneficiaries. So I think that that's the ongoing process, is to continue to say, how do I consolidate? Like if you have, old 401ks, 5 old 401ks from previous employers, like consolidate it into one. I mean, that's an easy thing we can do. So I think that's key, is always with, that and the communication. If there's things that you have that you want people to have, specific people, then make sure that that's clear and written out, and that those people know this is what I want. Because then I think everybody will just be on the same page and they know what to expect.
Right. So I think we covered a lot of good things, and I think the underlying message is you need to have a will. You need to let people know where your things are, and keep things simple. It's always better to have more and less places than more or
less and more places.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well
So
yeah. And really to work with, this is, I think it's Sax Wealth Advisors. I mean, part of the, the conversations that we have with our clients is really, it's about this kind of thing. Just always, this is part of the planning. This is really part of the financial plan, is thinking about, what happens when, you get sick, debilitated, or you pass away, which, eventually we're all going to. So.
Right. So it's important to have an estate plan in place. So this will be an ongoing thing. This is one-on-one with Sax Wealth Advisors. This was our first one, the value of an estate plan. Stay tuned for the next one. And that's it for today.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.